Welcome back to the Entrepreneur's Journey. I'm your host, Peter Santry, a former Wall Street exec turned business guide. And each week we talk with entrepreneurs and business leaders about how they grow, scale, and build lasting enterprise value. And from time to time, we spotlight the trusted partners who help business owners build value, navigate transitions, and win their endgame. Today, my guest is Irina Demore, CEO and founder of Primera Ventures, an award-winning strategic M&A consultancy based in London that helps business owners turn their vision into value. Recognized as the best strategic M&A advisory firm by UK Wealth and Finance International for 3 consecutive years, Primera Ventures guides founders through the journey of building investable businesses and achieving high-value exits. In this episode, we'll explore what it really takes to prepare for your endgame, how to think strategically about the exit, bridge the valuation gap between where your company stands today and where you want it to be, and how to future-proof your business, even if your market is plateauing or shifting. We also look at practical ways to accelerate value creation and why the best exits are engineered long before they're executed. So Irina, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Hi, Peter. The pleasure is mine. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience about obviously all these pressing issues that we as professionals discuss behind the closed doors. So I think I would like to welcome this opportunity to kind of sneak peek behind our scenes, and I'll be very happy to share some of the insights for those entrepreneurs and business owners that are looking forward to a next step in their entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, great. So one of the most pressing issues that I deal with is in my coaching practice is preparing for exit and succession. Can you enlighten us for what are the best first steps a founder and their leadership team should take as they think about their end game?
So I think before starting talking about the end game and obviously all these practical steps that is very necessary to take, and we'll discuss the timing of it and everything else. I think the starting point of this discussion, I think I would like to define what is the end game is in our own terms. So I think for those ones who are actually considering that as their potential next step, the question is going about the buyers, who the buyers is, and potentially how the company is going to be sold. However, on the terms of where we are, the end game actually defined as a clarity of outcome. We actually within the M&A kind of playbook can define that exit not necessarily as a whole full potential exit, but there are different ways of exiting your business. So I mean, particularly, we usually talk about those 10 different ways of transitioning the ownership to a new venture. So that entails is exiting your business internally, and that usually goes within those factors of transitioning to family, transitioning to the management team. There are obviously elements of liquidation for some of the businesses, as you briefly mentioned. We will get to that also at some point. It's driven obviously by industry that you are in, but by and large, we define once again the overreaching the messages in here. So you need to understand your options. So what is it entails in terms of the end game for you specifically, because one size does not fit all. So every exit, it has to be driven obviously by the fact of the business, what the business is, but also about such important elements of the personal goals of the founder or business owner, and also their financial goals. So I think these are 3 pillars of what we usually talk of privately owned companies that define that roadmap of that.
Okay, so Irina, so if we're thinking about it, the first step would be to say, okay, what do I want for my end game to look like? And it could be, as you said, sale externally, sale internally to the team, family, whatever, or it could be just make the business self-managing and elevate myself to a position, or the owner to a position where they can extract money from the business and just ride a comfortable lifestyle as well. That also could be an exit.
You are absolutely spot on. As I have mentioned, it's not one size fits it all. So the starting point of the framework that we use in-house as a dream exit strategy, this starts for defining. So we want to understand, because every business owner and entrepreneur have got their own ideas, their vision. And usually those vision is traditionally associated with the growth. We praise, obviously, those entrepreneurs who has got brilliant idea how they're going to grow the business, but when actually it comes to that exit, so this is where we see a slightly different outlook. So as you rightly said, come back to what you said, the vector of how the business owner is exiting is driven by his or her goals. So that's where I think the starting point is. So the starting point is having that discussion. So what is the vision an entrepreneur has for potentially his business and his transitioning down the line? And that's, once again, this is the first step that we recommend taking. So we offer the consultation where we obviously bounce this idea with some of the framework that allows the entrepreneurs, once again, to engage in that discussion and explore the option. The next steps from that, perhaps,
Yeah.
once again, looking at those some options and understanding what actually fits and what doesn't.
So you mentioned the three pillars, which are the business, the personal, and the financial. How do these interact, and why is it critical to align all three of those pillars before starting any exit planning?
That's actually a good question to ask, because once again, there is a huge difference. We talk about, once again, in media, very, very openly about those very successful and less successful exit in today's market. But once again, the difference between publicly traded company and the privately owned company is dramatic. And once again, one of the important element to it, it's driven, once again, those options are driven with the financial goals of entrepreneurs and their obviously personal aspiration. Let me just give you an example. I think that always works best in terms of illustrating what I mean by that. So we work with the business owners from, in terms of demographic, from early 40s to let's say late 60s and 70s, obviously, with those ones who are potentially transitioning their business after long trading history. So with that in mind, so if we actually take just that kind of a slice and angle of a demographic of a business owner, so those one who exited at 45 might have completely different aspiration personally, and from those one who is 65 or etc. So 1 in 45 just probably wanted to move into the new business venture, and that's the reason they would like to transition the existing venture into new ownership, whereas a 65 years old would perhaps consider the retirement plan on the goals. And with that in mind, the financial goals of both will be looking slightly different. So one might have a business plan where the certain number would fulfill his entrepreneurial ambitions to move on to another project. Whereas the entrepreneur who is retiring, he also would have what we call a magic number to contribute to his retiring in nest and transition. So with that in mind, that looks slightly different. Now, if we have to add the angle to that of the business where it stands, so because business obviously is very important and actually bears a lot of weight in that decision. So some businesses, they are more palatable to transitioning than the other. And that, again, once again, there is an angle to it. So to what extent a business is structured for that transition of ownership, and also the industry they're in. So for example, if the company is really palatable acquisition target for private equity, for example, this is where we consider, for example, a partial exit. So whereas the private equity firm usually acquires the majority of share, but not all, let's say 70%, and 30% remains with entrepreneur. So that 30% of ownership remains with the existing business owner, sometimes for 5, 7, sometimes 10 years, when the private equity firm realizing their growth potential. And there and then business owner exiting on what we call a second bite of a cherry, exiting for a second time. So that actually gives us a timeline, sometimes 7 to 10 years. So this is built into, once again, those aspirations and plans or personal plans of business owner, whether it is an optimal option for them. So as I said, we just covered just few elements of that. But personal, financial, and business aspect is those three main pillars to be considered if business owner thinking of that successful exit down the line.
So so say you have that person in your demographic, the 45 to 65-year-old. When is it best to bring someone like yourself in? And, are we talking about, 10 years before exit? When should somebody say, I need to think about an advisor to get my ducks in a row, get my business right, as you said, the personal right and the financial right? What kind of lead time should they bring, or should they approach you at? When should they come to you?
This is also one of the burning questions that I often answer, and this is very controversial one. So traditionally, business owners think that they would need to engage with advisors at the point of considering the exit. However, if you and I, we decide to sign a contract, it's very unlikely we're going to engage with a lawyer the day before the contract is signed. So this is something that actually requires a preparation. So similarly, the exit, the engineered exit, the exit that is orchestrated on your terms, vision, and a timeline, really done with a lot of preparation. The best people in our kind of cohort of people that we serve, this is a startup founders. They engage with advisors really at the start, on the level of where actually they conceive the idea, and then they wanted to understand what it entails them down the line in terms of the exit. So if we talk about mature business owners, so I think, once again, as we discussed, it's not one size fits it all, but legitimate kind of the timeline for those one who are interested in, once again, maximizing the value of the asset, i.e. a business they're holding, and understanding, once again, the best option and optimal option of their exit. It's usually 2 to 5 years. So this is the time where we can help business owner, obviously, to maximize the structure of the business, identify the potential growth of the business or the fundamentals, and etc., and finally, obviously, have a list of potential buyers that is usually done, what we call an off-market opportunity.
Okay, so oftentimes there's a reality where the owner thinks his or her business is worth X, and in fact, when you look at it, it's something less than that. There's usually a valuation gap between where they want to get to and what the business is actually worth. So how do you close that? How do you identify and close the gap? And what levers do you pull to close that gap during that 2 to 5 year interim period?
The starting point of that discussion is obviously understanding, in order to improve something, we really need to measure that. So that conversation starts when we actually value the business at the time when business owner obviously getting engaged with us. And I think it's very also interesting discussion how valuation is done. This is also one of the topic that I've been quizzed constantly, because once again, within the privately owned companies, valuation is something of a science and art. But by and large, we are not going to go, because I think it's a topic for another day. But by and large, the most important misunderstanding that actually brings us to that valuation gaps is that business owners usually consider that the business is valued on the revenues, whereas the buyers value business on the risk profile. So this is where I think, why we usually see these valuation gaps, because for buyers, they price risk before growth. So anything that's structured, what we need to understand, how transferable the business is to a new ownership. And here I can give you another example, which also illustrates my point. Because one might consider that the businesses of a higher value market capitalization perhaps are more, once again, have got that more transferable enterprise value that a smaller target. So we had once upon a time, we engaged in valuation and subsequently preparing business for an exit of a company that had been dealing with the infrastructure projects in the construction industry. So the business was turning around 50 million, which is allegedly where we are in low mid-market level, is a quite stable business. However, when we started looking into fundamentals of the business, and the fundamentals comes, it really doesn't matter whether the business, once again, in a low mid-market or something that makes 1.2 billion in evaluation, those fundamentals remain to be the same. So we are looking about the clarity of the balance sheet. We're looking about the stability of revenues, whether they're coming recurring or whether they indeed have got a lesser risk factor. We're looking about the spread of the customer base, and etc., etc. So going back to my example, so with that specific business owner, the construction company, because it was infrastructure project and because we were on a higher value, he had only 5 of them on the books that would contributed to the revenue of the company, and 5 of them, they were mates of the business owner at the golf course that he was a part of for the last 20 years. So the question, and beyond that, the best salesperson and the best person within the company for everything was the business owner. So when we actually look at the transferability of the value within the business actually was nothing. There was no one who would be prepared to pay anything. And I'm not talking about discussing what. It just business would it has no readiness of transferring its ownership to a next business one. So
let's build on that point a little bit. So you have a business that is overly reliant on the owner because it's his friends who are his customers, and he's also the only really salesperson, so overly reliant there. Customer concentrations, which are few, so that is another red flag. So when a buyer who's looking, as you said, at risk versus the revenues, they're going to say, the red flags are too many, and I can't transfer this business. So it sounds like in that interim 2 to 5 years that you talked about as the time frame, those are the kind of issues that you address. The transferability issue. How do you make your business less reliant on the owner? How do you make sure that the customer base is broad enough, that the supplier base is broad enough? So you're working on these de-risking aspects of the business to get it to be more investable. Is that an accurate way of putting it?
That would be a really good way of putting that together. Because as I've mentioned, there are traditional, what we call it, value drivers within the business, and you have mentioned a few of them that directly contribute, whether it is valuation, and by and large valuation, it's a risk assessment of the business. So this is a direct factors that contribute to that important element of ownership transferability. Yes, this is once again, depending where the business stands today and where it wants to be in the future, that's how the wider gap is. And to answer your earlier question in terms of the timeline, so obviously the wider the gap, the longer it will take to get the business ready for that particular exit. And as you rightly mentioned, the fact that this business is really take a full advantage of the business owner involvement on day-to-day operation is one of the critical factors. And I think we see that very, very often. I mean, to tell the truth, in 80% of the time that business is preparing for that exit, that it isn't really an issue. And to tell the truth, this is also one of the factors that takes longer to actually to mitigate and put in place. So when we were talking about this 2 to 5 years kind of a roadmap, so this is where the 5 actually pushing it is to have that management in place that would ensure that the business can operate within similar framework as it is with the current business owner.
So basically, to extricate that owner from all those roles, we need time to get managers in there who can make the business more self-managing. So let's tack away to a different subject. The industry plays a big role in the saleability of a company. So you said the roadmap looks different for a company that's growing, plateauing, or declining, for example. Can you share some examples, maybe from retail, distribution, or professional services, how repositioning a business created growth and a more saleable business on the back end?
Absolutely. As I said, just to home it within the previous threads that we had within this conversation, we have mentioned that the overall factor of transferability, and also not only the transfer of ownership, but also being a palatable acquisition target, comes from 2 points. One, obviously within the company itself, obviously how it's structured, managed, and everything else. This is where that historical factors, when we look backwards and seeing, the performance of the company over the years, actually play a role in order to forecast it's in the future. But another element, very important element, it's where the company is a part of what industry or sector, because whether you want it or not, it would assume all traits of that industry and sector. And as you rightly said, we define it 3, what we call the traffic light, 3 different ones. So there's one that is growing, there's one is plateauing, and the one is constantly declining industries. So understanding what industry you represent is a really important element of that discussion. And that also sometimes is misunderstood, because if the business owner is saying, we have been doing what we're doing for 25 years and it was okay, not realizing that actually industry is shifting, this is one of the risk factors that would preclude any successful a positioning or a repositioning or exit in the future. So let's just unpack that. So when we're talking about what industry are out there, and once again, we're constantly engaging in that research and being on top of that industry insights, and we share those with those ones who are part of our ecosystem, whether it is advisors or whether it's business owners, just giving that piece of information, once again, that is important for them to keep on their books in order to understand, once again, what the options are available to them. So I will start with the brighter side of the story. So obviously we all know those growing industry that hitting headlines in today's world. Anything today in AI and machine learning, anything with the cybersecurity, climate change, EV ecosystem, as you know, it is a growing industry. And even, the companies that specifically, in the starting phase, they're not necessarily hitting that performance indicator. They're still riding the wave of the industry growth, and they still, become that palatable, what we call a target for potential acquisition or merger.
Right.
And the other 2 industry, this is where I think where we really need to pay attention to that, especially if those one who are listening to your audience listening to the podcast, and they identify themselves that they're part of the industry. I would perhaps fine tune, if they're doing something right now, having coffee or anything else, probably pay attention to, what we're going to be discussing right now. So plateauing industry. So they are not there in decline, but this is the industry that is still going through some kind of consolidation or any shifts, etc., etc. So this is the time where you still have got that runway to make changes, if, especially, once again, if it's a demographic or any personal goals that driving you to that exit, you would rather take the matters in your own hand and start engineering that exit. So what we are actually considering those plateauing industry, anything within e-commerce, logistics and courier services, the hospitality, the restaurant, the education and training, the telecom, the professional and construction services, they are all falling into that what we call plateauing. So this is where what we would call it, because the industry plateauing, so you're basically all in the same pot. This is where individual performance of the company is really, really an important element. So when we were talking about this risk factor, so on all the foundational elements that you can showcase to the buyer, so you have really, really strong structure within the company that is still sustainable with the transition of ownership, that would really highlight once again the appetite of potential buyers. So, and obviously now coming to those one who in decline, and specifically for those, I mean, we see that very often, specifically with entrepreneurs who are at the end of their entrepreneurial journey. So you remember we were talking about the demographic of 16, 65, and etc., etc. So we see a lot of this declining in. So for them, the urgency of taking an action is really a priority, because once again, you remember talking about personal, financial, and business. So the business actually in a declining. So they are personally at the kind of the end of their entrepreneurial journey, and perhaps the financial aspect, if obviously the business is contributing to their retirement pot, is an important element. Maximizing that value is important. So who is in this declining industry? So anything with print media and publishing. So we talk about the agencies. So this is the one that, really, I mean, they've been riding the wave for a few decades, but this is the time for them to, once again, to consider that either pivot, there are two elements to that. Either you pivot to another industry. So for example, we do have the cases where we help traditional print industry to move into the digital, and that would allow them kind of another reborn, I would say. Or once again, there is something that is an immediate action. So especially with fragmented industry where the media, all that print media and publishing is, it's a consolidating that, being able to have that a higher kind of market capitalization and exiting, because exiting to a potential buyer. This is one of the elements. So the other industry that we actually come across very often, specifically in the UK, so those who've been following the cases of Matches Fashion or Sports Direct and Debenham, so you know that many traditional brick and mortar retails, they have been suffering for the last probably decade. And unfortunately, some of them, they are not on that on our map anymore. So anything to do with, once again, with the physical retail, this is also a crossroads for them. So they have, once again, a way of either one way of, because in the retail businesses, they usually own some of the businesses, they own the property. So either capitalize on that, use that asset class and reposition themselves, or reposition once again to e-commerce. E-commerce is a plateauing, but it still has got a longer runway. So so by and large, once again, you really need to kind of have, for this is perhaps the message to entrepreneur. You really want to kind of bounce some ideas of your kind of operational time and understand what industry you are, or reach out for help for some of the reputable advisors who can help you with, and identify what options you have. So do you have an option of pivoting? Do you have that option of consolidating, or any other options that you currently have? And this is a really immediate and actionable kind of outcome.
An important decision. Yeah. So it sounds like the growing companies, they just ride the wave and they don't have to distinguish themselves as well, and they can just people will invest in them because there is the growth in the industry. The ones that are plateauing, it's really important to differentiate your strength and your ability to capture market share in a plateauing industry. And those that are in declining industries, there might be consolidation plays or pivoting plays where they can use their skills and apply it to a pivoting to a higher growth area where their skills might be useful, and resume growth to make them investable. So it's interesting to put that industry lens on top of it. So Irina, so for listeners who recognize themselves in this conversation, maybe they're in a slowing industry or simply ready to plan ahead, what's the best next step in their journey, and how do they get in touch with you and Primera Ventures to help them get to their end game?
So if you are, those who are listening us, if you identify yourself as an entrepreneur at the crossroads, as we would say, considering your next step, we usually engage with those ones, once again, with that consultation, discussing some potential option. Or we have, in fact, we pioneered the reason we, as you rightly said at the beginning, we have been holding this award-winning status for last 3 years. So we have pioneered the very efficient way of getting actionable results. So we usually advise those ones who would like to explore the option in that strategic engagement that we run with, for example, our clients. It's called Next Step. So Next Step is a strategic advisory engagement design to help business owners to identify their potential end game based on those factors that we have discussed: financial, personal, and business. We also help to identify the gaps, strengthen performance, and most importantly, become investor ready within 2 to 5 years of their potential roadmap.
Great. Okay. And then in terms of getting in touch with you, is it best to visit the Primera Venture website and go there and see if that's for them to get in touch with you?
So if you would like to explore engagement on our site and request private consultation, so please check the link that would be provided below this forecast, or indeed go directly to our Primera Ventures website. That way we would direct you there. But I think since we already have this conversation, and perhaps you're better positioned than those one who starts just engaging with those thoughts, just use the link and get in touch with us so we can help you at least to identify where you are today and where you can potentially be tomorrow successfully.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for your time, Irina. That's very, very interesting conversation, and one that's, with the baby boom, very topical for a lot of people. So appreciate it. And thanks to the audience for being on the entrepreneur's journey. And until next time, we will see you later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter.